When we look at the first civilizations of the Near East, their first cities, and the birth of writing and city life, we tend to look at the cities of Sumeria, Uruk, Ur, Kish, Nippur, Lagash, and then the rise of Akkad. But there is another culture here too, Elam, of the cities of Anshan and Susa, east of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. This ancient civilization spoke a language isolate we are still unsure of, but we know it was not Semitic. So what was it? Who were these people? Where did the people of Elam come from, and where did they go? Hi, I'm Benjamin, and this is the history of Elam, but how did I hear about these people in the first place? When I was reading Genesis in Torah, I came across this line. It was in the time of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. And Elam here stuck out to me as being familiar. Where had I heard this name before? Indeed I had. It was here, also in Genesis, with the sons of Noah, B'nai Shem, Elam. The descendants of Shem, that's the son of Noah. So from these few passages, I began to dig a rabbit hole into whatever this kingdom was, and it goes a long way, over 2,500 years. So let's dig in. And what I dug up is the fascinating story of a kingdom and people who lasted for thousands of years alongside the great civilizations of the Middle Eastern Bronze Age. And this is their story. The word Elam itself is not from the Elamite language, and in Sumerian sources from the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, the name Elam was written Nim, meaning high or upland, often together with Ki, meaning land or country. Later, this would be written in the Semitic language Akkadian as Elemu or Elamitu. But the Elamites probably called their land Hatamti, in Linear Elamite, a script, or Hatamti, cuneiform Elamite, another script. Human civilization in the region began to urbanize during the Ubaid period, from 5000 BCE, after a slow, long period of technological growth. The city of Susa was founded as early as 4200 BCE by the river Karun, Iran's only navigable river today. But we do not know if this was an Elamite city at this point. The Elamites probably grew up first in the Zagros Mountains as a pre-Iranian people. We don't know. But what we do know is that the Sumerian city of Uruk, to the west, went through a cultural expansion in which its pottery and art spread into the Elamite kingdoms of Awan, Anshan, and Shamash-Ki, who loosely merged to form Elam along with Shushiana or Susa at its core. The cuneiform script of the Sumerian civilization spread into Elam and helped shape a simplified form of the Linear Elamite script. However, both writing systems were used at the same time. Elam, in the 4th millennium BCE, was decentralized but had distinct cultures of its own. Under influence of Uruk, then, the city of Susa became visible to us in Sumerian accounts. We have no records from Elam here, not from itself, and we must go on what others have written of them and of the material culture found there. One thing that does distinguish it from Sumeria and the Akkadians farther to the northeast is it having a long sea coast along the Persian Gulf. This allowed Elam to be influenced by the Indus River Valley civilization through trade in the east, and to become wealthy in the material trade between that Indus River Valley and Mesopotamia. However, returning to Elam, the first dynasty of which anything is known is the Awan dynasty, and the founding of this dynasty, along with conflict between Elam and Sumeria, and then the rise of Akkad in the north, begins the historical records of Elam. Much of what we know at the beginning of this period comes from the Sumerian king list and its king, Enmebaragesi, king of Kish, whose name probably means the priest who fills the throne, something of that nature. A large, holy man, perhaps, who became king. Anyway, he achieved hegemony, rule over southern Mesopotamia. He is the first king who we know was more than myth. This man lived, and his record says that he invaded Elam. This is what it says. Enmebaragesi, the one who carried away as he spoiled the weapons of the land of Elam, became king. A war between Sumer and Elam began in 2600 BCE, about which we know little, but Elam appears to have been defeated near Susa. This was not a complete conquest. Elamite land stretched high into the Zagros Mountains, and further south, past Anshan. The Elamites and the generations after rallied around Awan in the north, probably in the mountains, founding a new dynasty of kings who would come down to strike back at Sumeria in revenge, and rule much of Sumeria in turn for 2 generations. It is uncertain where the Awan dynasty was, but likely north of Susa, possibly built of those who had survived the attack, who regrouped then under new leaders, but we do not know. A royal list at Susa gives us 12 kings of Awan, and a further 12 kings of Shimashki. During this period, the kings of Awan, such as Ukku-Tanhish and Eonatum, king of Lagash and Sumeria, frequently attacked one another. Sometime Elam held the Sumerian lands, and sometimes Sumerian city-states held Susa below the mountains in Elam. During the Awan dynasty, a king arose further north called Sargon of Akkad. From the 2330s, Sargon of Akkad had created the world's first military empire. Around the year 2300, King Lu-Ishan of Elam was unfortunate enough to have to fight a war against Akkad. King Sargon of Akkad took Susa and subjected Awan to his rule. It is noted here that Akkad tried to force its Akkadian language upon the people of Elam over the next century, with further conquests in Elam of Pashima and south into Anshan. Due to the desire for material resources, a colonial nature, records of Elam reach further west in Sumeria and the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadians were cruel and ruled without mercy, but they allowed Elamites to rule from Susa as governors, Shak Kanakku, in Akkadian, or city-state princes, Nc, from a Sumerian language title. So much of the Awan dynasty was able to hold on to power as regional governors, working for the Akkadian regime as puppets. The dates of what happened next are not certain, but the Akkadian Empire began to weaken in the late 3rd millennium BCE, and from the reign of Epiramupi, these appointed governors of the Awan dynasty slowly began gathering power back from Akkadia. Epiramupi became a military governor, able to gather troops, as was his successor, Elyishmani, who had an Akkadian name, indicating that the culture was fusing with Elamite culture. But by around the year 2100, after the death of the Akkadian king Shar-Kalishari, the lands of Elam under Putzor in Shushinak declared independence from the Akkadian Empire. In Shushinak threw off the Akkadian language and promoted the linear Elamite script to consolidate power with a nationalist identity. He conquered both Susa in the middle from his Awan lands in the north, as well as Anshan in the south, and united Elam into a kingdom. The inscriptions of Ur-Nammu tell us that Shushinak then invaded Mesopotamia and conquered several cities in the middle of Mesopotamia, before heading north and sacking the city of Akkad itself. Quite a military feat that would have been. This weakened the Akkadian Empire, so that Sumerians revolted at Uruk in the south, establishing the first free Sumerian kings in 200 years, and the third dynasty of Ur. The Akkadian Empire fell into infighting, allowing Elam, king of Inshushinak, to consolidate power and rebuild the temples of Susa. However, upon King Inshushinak's death, the Guti, another pre-Iranian people who also spoke a language isolate, invaded. King Inshushinak's conquests had removed the threat of Akkad from their western border, and so they overran the Akkadian Empire like locusts, and then swept down into Sumeria and then Elam, ending the Awan dynasty. 100 years passed. During the Awan dynasty, the land of Shimashki is mentioned in an inscription to King Inshushinak in the years after 2100 BCE. It reads, "In a single day he made fall prostrate at his feet, and, when the king of Shimashki came up, he seized the fate of Puzur Inshushinak." Shimashki was an Elamite subkingdom with its own dynasty, within Elam under the Awan dynasty. There were layers of kingships within Elam. The Guti who had invaded ruled Akkad for around a century. They built a dynasty that also ruled Sumeria, which extended into Elam, but Elam does not seem to be ruled by the Guti for all of this time, and the Shimashki dynasty began to wiggle its way into power and unite Elam under its rule. The Elamite king list from Susa, as well as having given us the names of Awan kings, gives us the names of 12 kings from the Shimashki dynasty. Several of these kings could have ruled at the same time as each other, but we know that the Shimashki dynasty's first king, Girname, ruled Elam at the same time as Shusin, who ruled the Neo-Sumerian Empire, who had expanded with the retreat of the Guti and the weakness of Akkad up out of Sumeria. He gave one of his daughters to a Shimashki prince, so there was diplomacy, not just war, between Elam and the Neo-Sumerian Empire. The sixth king of the Shimashki dynasty, Kin Datu, son of Ebrat I, took back much of Elam from the Sumerians, whose leader Amarsin had invaded Elam during the time of Ebrat before him. Shimashki, allied with Susa and Anshan, unified the land, invaded and sacked the city of Ur, taking its ruler Ibn Sin prisoner. Kin Datu destroyed Ur's kingdom, and Elam ruled it for 21 years. The Akkadians returned, however, and drove the Elamites out. Susa, which had fallen in the past at various times to outside rule, remained part of Elam around the year 1900 BC, and it was during this time that the dynasty of Shimashki stops. There is about a 20-year period, from 1900 to 1880 BCE, in which it is not clear who is the dominant dynasty in Elam. What we do know is that Shanshunak II of the Shimashki dynasty, often called Ndavu, was attacked by Gungunum, king of the city-state of Larsa. We don't know why he attacked Elam, but he destroyed the city of Pashime and sacked Anshan in the south. From this point, Ndavu vanishes, and the Shimashki dynasty shifts into the Sukkal dynasty. What seems to happen is that Elam had for many years, by this point, taken official titles from the third dynasty of Ur, or the Neo-Sumerian Empire, and imported methods of governance and legislation from their lands, from the city-states of Sumer. Ndavu was probably killed by Gungunum during a moment in Elamite history, when the Elamite state was in the process of reforming its legal and administrative structures, so that the transition was not complete, and that the men who carried these titles of Sukkuma, meaning Grand Vizier or Minister, from the Sumerian Sukkal, meaning King, these men rose to power and replaced the Shimashki kings with a new line. The founder of this new dynasty was Shilhaha, the chosen of Ebrat, according to him. Over the next 100 years, Akkadian-speaking city-states like Larsa kept trying to attack Elam, but they failed, and rulers further west addressed the Elamite king as father, and they his sons, to show respect to Elam. The power structure of Elam evolved a triad structure, with local kings in Anshan and Susa belonging to the same families, with a king over them ruling both. This was directly inherited from the offices of the Sukkal Ma. They belonged to the same family and would appoint their cousins and brothers in various posts between these three. From the reign of Shuruktu in the early 18th century, who raised an army of 12,000 men and defeated tribes in the Zagros Mountains, Elam proved it was a power in its own right. Alliances were made with the Amorite warlord Shamshi Alu of Eshnunna to protect Elam against the Guti. His successor, Siwe Palahupak, flipped Shuruktu's foreign policy around and aligned against Eshnunna by joining with Mari and the powerful Hammurabi of Babylon against Eshnunna. Elam conquered and imposed direct rule upon it. Hupa expanded into Mesopotamia, and for a time was the most powerful man known. But it is a cruel world. Allies do not last, and King Hammurabi of Babylon turned upon him and drove the Elamites out. For the latter part of this Sukkal Ma dynasty, we do not know much. We know that the Elamites became more and more involved in Mesopotamian politics, but on the whole, then, there is darkness. A new dynasty arose around 1500 BCE, or rather, things changed, and all that we can see now is that things were different from what they had been. A leader arose, Igihatet, who was no longer called Sukkal Ma, but the king of Anshan and Susa. These kings are called Kidinuids, named after King Kidinu. Later, within this group of kings, they shifted from being called King of Anshan and Susa to King of Susa and Anshan. What we are seeing here is that Elamites are arguing between Akkadian-focused culture and Elam-focused culture, between Akkadian influence and language and an Elamite identity. By around 1400 BCE, the Elamite cultural identity had won. Tepti Ahar, in the late 15th century, moves the capital 10 miles from Susa, building a new city at Kabnak, modern-day Haft Tepe. He builds a fantastic palace, and the written language begins shifting back from Akkadian to Elamite, though this is a slow process over a couple centuries. And long before this change is complete, the Kassites invade from the Zagros Mountains, having swept in after the fall of the Babylonian Empire in 1531 BCE. After this, a man named Igihalki, most likely a usurper, steals the throne and founds the Igihalki dynasty. He may have been put on the Elamite throne by the Babylonian Kassite king Kurigalzu I, who briefly conquered Susa. Kurigalzu II also occupies Elam around 1330 BCE, but if his intent was to make Elam align culturally with Babylon, this was a failure, because from this point Elamite culture is more expansive, and the Akkadian language fades on inscriptions in favor of Elamite. But King Humban Numena marries a Kassite princess. The next king, Untash Napiri Shah, sometime around 1300 BCE, builds the city of Dur Untash, one of the only surviving ziggurats outside Mesopotamia. Today it is called Chogazan Bil. King Untash dedicates this to the god Narpirisha, which may explain part of his name, Untash Napirisha. But also, this deity belonged to Anshan in the south, whilst this new city was built in the north of the kingdom. Untash appears to be consolidating an Elamite identity using religion to extend political power through it. He married Napirasu, the daughter of Burnaburiash, a Babylonian king, and raised this statue in her memory. Sadly, we have lost the head, but the inscription reads, I, Napirasu, wife of Untash Napirisha, he who would seize my statue, who would smash it, who would destroy its inscription, who would erase my name, may he be smitten by the curse of Napirisha, of Kirarisha, and of Inshushinka, that his name shall become extinct, that his offspring be barren, that the forces of Beltia, the great goddess, shall sweep down on him. This is Napirasu's offering. The Babylonian chronicles tell us that the Kassites are weakened by the Middle Assyrian Empire rising out of Ashur, and that in this power vacuum, King Kidunhutran of Elam launches 2 raids. The first, he sacked Der, the traditional staging ground for attacks on Elam. This was pretty strategic in my opinion, as well as taking Nippur, deposing Babylonian king Enlil-Nadin Shumi, a puppet king. In his second raid, he attacks Marad and Isin during the raid of Adad Shuma Idina. Hey, if you're liking this content, tap the like button, subscribe, donate via Patreon, or buy me a coffee. Thanks. Diolch. It is not sure how the Igahulka dynasty ended after Kidunhutran, but sometime between 1217 BCE and 1190 BCE, the power changed in Elam. Shutruk Nahunte I came to power, founding a dynasty, the Shatrukids, named after him, and the Elamite Empire. He crushes the Kassites and expands Elam. When the ruling dynasty in Babylon changed, Nahunte, whose family had married into the old dynasty and related to the current one who had just lost, Meleshipak, this would have been setting him up to lose politically. We are not sure why he invaded, but this could be why. He invaded Mesopotamia and stole many monuments from Babylon, including the stele of Naram-Sin. To the monument of his foe he added his own inscription, like a dog marking his territory on a tree. The inscription reads, I am Shutruk, Nahunte, son of Halatush in Shushunak, beloved servant of the god in Shushunak, king of Anshan and Susa, who has enlarged the kingdom, who takes care of the lands of Elam, the lord of the land of Elam. When the god in Shushunak gave me the order, I defeated Sipar. I took the stele of Naram-Sin and carried it off, bringing it to the land of Elam. For in Shushunak, my god, I set it as an offering. As suggested in the 2002 film The Emperor's Club, I suggest you watch it. For all of Nahunte's accomplishments, none of them lasted. This king was probably an egomaniac. The empire would fall, but not yet. His son, Kutu-Nahunte II, invaded Babylon as well, taking the statue of Marduk, a religious symbol, back to Elam. After him, Shilhak and Shushunak reigned for 30 years, from 1150 to 1120 BCE, and was the last great king of Elam. He built temples and many buildings. He also appears to have reorganized the federal structure of the empire, as well as invading Babylon during a period of infighting to strengthen Elam. He also campaigned against tribes in the Zagros Mountains, extending Elam's borders north and east. After Shilhak and Shushunak's long reign, a new king came to power in 1120, Hatulatush in Shushunak. This new king, Hatulatush, faced Nebuchadnezzar I, one of Babylon's greatest kings, who assembled a great army and invaded Elam in revenge for the raids of its prior 3 kings. Maybe you should not steal things from your next-door neighbors, just saying. Nebuchadnezzar defeats Hatulatush in battle, plunders Susa, and takes back the statue of Marduk. Hatulatush survives, we think, and flees south to Anshan, but he never recovers Susa, and in Elam we see 2 weaker or less notable kings, who are recorded in Susa after him. Then the dynasty ends, and in the records, there is darkness. Though we know that Elamite soldiers were sent to help Babylonia against the Assyrian king Shamshi-Adad V between 824 and 811, and that an Elamite ambassador went to Assyria, what we know about Elam from the year 1000 BCE to 760 BCE is almost nothing. These are called the Dark Ages of Elam. By the first half of the 8th century, however, Elam has emerged as a loosely unified kingdom, smaller than during the Middle Elamite period, but still of notable size, and holding both Anshan and Susa. The new dynasty is called the First Neo-Elamite Dynasty, and rules for less than a century, from 760 BCE to 688 BCE. During this time, there is a large migration of Indo-European peoples into the Iranian plateau of Medes, Persians, Parthians, and Sagartians. For the time, these people were conquered by the Neo-Assyrian Empire, but their presence made Elam's situation more complex, more difficult to form lasting alliances against their enemy in Assyria. So Humban Nikash of the New Elamite dynasty briefly aligned with Babylon against Sargon II of Assyria when Merodach-Baladan attempted to defend the cause of Babylonian independence from Assyria. This led to defeats. His successor was Shutruk-Nahunte II, who likely took the name Shutruk to evoke the memory of the Elamite Empire and rebuild a sense of national identity. In any case, this Shutruk was also defeated by Sargon II in 710, who reconquered Babylonia. He was defeated by Sargon II again in 708 BCE. However, we know the Elamites helped Merodach-Baladan briefly regain independence in 703 before being defeated by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Merodach-Baladan fled back to exile in Elam. So this means Shutruk-Nahunte II was helping Babylonians in several failed wars of independence against Assyria and giving them refuge. Shutruk held power for another decade, and then his brother, King Halutash-in-Shishunok I, sat on the throne, followed by one of his sons, who was killed in a rebellion, and then another son, Humban-Menanu. With the Assyrian Empire expanding in all directions under King Sennacherib, an alliance of resistance was formed of Babylonians, Medes, Chaldeans, Aromanians, Persians, and Elamites under Humban-Menanu joined them in a confederation led by a Chaldean prince. Despite such a large and grand alliance rising in revolt against Assyria, the rebels still lost the battle of Halule. 2 years later, Babylon was destroyed by Assyria, and the two following Elamite kings of the new Hubanid dynasty each raided Sippar. Then Elam had a bit of good luck. Its next king was Urtak, who was more diplomatic. He came to power in 674. He returned idols and monuments to Assyria that had been taken by his brother and father, Humban I and Humban II, before him. He changed Elam's foreign policy in the first year of his reign and aligned himself with Assyria's Esarhaddon, rather than trying to fight this larger enemy. Esarhaddon had, after all, conquered Egypt only 3 years before. He was not someone you messed with, and Urtak's older brother had nearly led Elam to its ruin in fighting against him. This good relationship lasted over 5 years, until Esarhaddon died, and Ashurbanipal the Great, the last great king of Assyria, came to power in 669 BCE. Ashurbanipal helped Urtak out when famine hit Elam by sending him grain to ease hunger. However, Egypt had revolted against the Assyrians under Pharaoh Taharqa in the 670s and 660s, with Ashurbanipal having to wage a war in Egypt over 900 miles away. It seems Urtak, for whatever reason, took his chances and invaded Babylon in 664. It seems a bit silly that he attacked the guy who gave him food during a famine, but this was a cruel time. Unfortunately for Urtak, he had no way of knowing that Assyria had just defeated the Egyptians again, and his army, along with him, were already coming back east. It was a miscalculation, and Ashurbanipal arrived much faster than Urtak thought he would, driving him back to Elam, where he died. The city of Susa is sacked. Ashurbanipal then cut his brother Teoman's head off and carried it back to Nineveh to hang up as a trophy in his court. Strangely, Ashurbanipal did not kill Urtak's sons. Instead, he split the Elamite kingship into two. Urtak's son Umanigash he placed as king at Madaktu in the north, and his other son, Tamaritu I, was made king in the south at Anshan. This does not last. The Parsu, who would become known as the Persians later, are forced by a domino of migrating peoples south into Anshan. Tamaritu I, who ruled Anshan, his fate is unclear. The area around Susa is what remains of the kingdom, with its puppet king Umanigash. But Assyria breaks out into civil war between Ashurbanipal and his brother Shamash Shumukin. In 652, Shamash Shumukin has taken on Babylonian culture and is taking up the banner of Babylon against his own birth culture of Akkadia. Whatever makes sense to gain power, I suppose. During the chaos, Umanigash's nephew, Tamaritu II, revolts against him, appears to slay his uncle, take power, and support the revolt against Ashurbanipal. So what we have here is both Assyria and Elam at the same time having civil wars, and one faction within Elam supporting the Babylonian faction in Assyria's civil war. But this was a bad move. A general named Indabibi takes advantage of the anarchy in Elam, chases Tamaritu II out, and declares himself king. However, maybe again because of the chaos, Indabibi does not respond to a letter sent by Ashurbanipal, so Ashurbanipal takes offense, declares war upon Elam, and kills Indabibi. At this stage, by the year 648 BCE, Elam is clearly breaking down as a state. A new Elamite king is chosen, yet again, Humbam-Holtosh III, at Madaktu. But when Ashurbanipal comes with his army, he flees to the mountains with his men. There are a couple usurpers. Timaratu II is put back on the throne by Ashurbanipal, and then removed. So Humbam-Holtosh seizes power against the wishes of Ashurbanipal. The relationship is not going good. Humbam-Holtosh will not give up Chaldean rebels fighting guerrilla wars against Ashurbanipal, and naturally this enrages him. So Ashurbanipal invades again, completely destroys Susa in a battle, and captures Humbam-Holtosh alive. He then boasts of the horror that he inflicts upon Elam. Ashurbanipal writes, Susa, the great city, abode of their gods, seat of their mysteries, I conquered. I entered its palaces, I opened their treasures where silver and gold, goods and wealth were amassed. I destroyed the ziggurat of Susa. I smashed its shining copper horns. I reduced the temples of Elam to naught. Their gods and goddesses I scattered to the winds. The tombs of their ancient and recent kings I devastated. I exposed to the sun, and I carried away their bones toward the land of Ashur. I devastated the provinces of Elam, and on their lands I sowed salt. After this, he carries Humbam-Holtosh back to Nineveh alive, and forces him to serve him food for his entertainment. As for Elam, Assyrian records cease to speak of it. The destruction of Elam may not be as complete as Assyria suggests. There is some evidence of smaller, petty Elamite kingdoms in the area. It becomes a small, out-of-the-way, unimportant state between the Medians on the Iranian plateau and the Neo-Assyrian Empire in Mesopotamia. In the next century, the Persians would lead a revolt against the Medians, beginning the Achaemenid Empire in 539 BCE. And this was, for a large extent, the end of Elam as its original identity. Though its language and identity did carry on for centuries, it would have become a hybrid of Persian and Elamite. A kingdom arose later in the area called Elymaïs, and this was an Elamite state of some kind, though its culture had been fused with Persian. It lasted until the early 3rd century, in which it was absorbed into the Sasanian Empire. And as for the Elamite people, then there was darkness.